Hello, hope you're doing great. This is Mariya Rajan, your friendly software engineer. And in this video, we're going to see how we can make use of constructors inside of Python. So in our previous video, we saw how we can create a class by means of using, like this particular syntax. And also we saw how we can create objects out of those classes, right? So we can just create an object using this particular syntax. But after we had created our object, this is basically an AC remote object and a TV remote object, we saw that we also had to initialize those properties which we had, attached to that class. So the keyword here is we had to initialize certain properties, right? So, like the properties that we initialized were basically the color property and also the functionality property, which are basically just, variables that are present inside this class, which in this case are just string variables. Now, over here, you can see that, like after we created that object, here we are initializing the AC remote color to be white and the AC remote functionality to be turns on AC. And similarly, we are also doing something similar to the TV remote. Here, we are setting the color, TV remote color to be black and the TV remote functionality to be turns on TV. But the thing here is, let's say if this remote control has a bunch of more variables. Let's say in addition to color and functionality, it has, number of buttons, right? Number of buttons. Maybe it's a number. Let's say initialize it to 0. So, like there are a bunch of buttons, right, in a remote. So let's say, it has more properties, number of buttons. Let's say we are even storing the dimensions of the remote, which it could be length, which maybe we can store it as we can just initialize it as a float, and then we have breadth and height. So, like you can see that quickly, the number of variables that you have in a class could stack up, right? You can very easily start having a lot of these variables in your class. But then for us to start using the class, right, for us to start using the functionality in the class, what is the bare minimum of initializations that need to happen, right? So that is not very clear when it comes to this particular design, right? So, when you after you created your object, if you just say AC remote dot, you can see that all the properties that you had added in the class are just getting listed here. So whenever we want to create an object which is of an instance of the class remote control, should we go about and initialize all the variables? There are cases where you might want to do that, but in this particular instance, right, in this particular instance, you're just calling the method button press, right? And for calling this method button press, the actual variables that you need according to this design, okay, like according to this design, the actual variables that had to be initialized are just two things, right? Just the color and the functionality. Now, to initialize these crucial variables such as the color and functionality, which are required for us to start making use of, like the objects such as the AC remote and TV remote, which we create out of the remote control class, we have a helper function that is available for us, and we can call them as special function, and this special function is called init in Python. Okay, so the way you create it is, you say double underscores init and double underscore, all right, and then yes, you have also open parenthesis and close parenthesis and colon, and then you go inside its indentation block. So this particular method, this a double underscore init double underscore method, is one of the dunder functions, right? Like, so because it's called the double underscores, right? So, in short, the double underscore is what is called as the double underscore dunder. That's how, like in the Python community, people call these double underscore functions as dunder methods. So yeah, like, so this is one of the dunder methods, but this is really useful for us because it helps us to initialize the crucial variables that are required by our object. So here the syntax is basically double underscore init double underscore, and then the parenthesis, and inside that you have you pass in the self object, which is basically the the object instance that you're creating. All right, so here inside this, what we'll do is we'll initialize those two variables, basically the color and the functionality, which we were doing outside before. Like we were doing it here after we created that object, right? So we will, make use of this init method to initialize those crucial variables for us. So here, it needs to initialize the color, and also it needs to initialize the functionality, right? So but then the color and the functionality, setting it to just an empty string, that's something that is already being done. Why should we do it again? Why should we repeat ourselves? So here we should actually set the actual color, and we should set the actual functionality. So to do that, we already saw when we discussed about functions in a previous video that we can pass in arguments to a function, right? So that's what we're going to do here, right? So here this function is it's just a function that is being attached to this class, right? So when a function is attached to a class in Python world, we call them as methods. So this method, but it's essentially a function, right? So this first argument is that self object, which is basically the instantiated object, and then let's also set up this init method in such a way that it accepts those two crucial values that are required to instantiate this object. So the two crucial objects, which is basically the color and the functionality, right? So these are the two arguments that are going to come inside this init method. So what we're doing here is we're taking the color value that is passed into this init method, over here, and we're just assigning it to the color variable that is attached to this class. Okay, so that's the same thing that we're doing here as well. To we're just taking this functionality's value that is coming in, and we are assigning it to the functionality that is attached to this class. So to make it even more clear, right, if you want, you can just say incoming I underscore. It's you don't need to do that, because in Python, right, the Python's interpreter is smart enough to understand that this color is different from this color. So this color that we are mentioning here is the value that is coming in, and this color that is being assigned to is basically the class's color variable. But if you want to keep it a bit more explicit, what we can do is we can just modify the name. Actually, you can give whatever name you want. You can even say hat or something. You can give whatever you want, you can give. So we'll just say I underscore color, I denoting input, basically whatever the input is coming in, and here again we'll say I underscore functionality. So in that way it'll be a bit more clear, right? So I underscore functionality. So yeah, so basically the whatever input color that is coming in, we are just assigning it to the color variable of the class, and whatever input functionality that is coming in, we are assigning it to the functionality variable of the class. So now, since we have this init method present inside this class, right, what we can do is, so instead of assigning the color and functionality after we create an instance of the class remote control, what we could do is we can just remove these two lines. And so when we are creating an instance of this class over here itself, within these parentheses, we can just pass in the crucial variables, basically the variables that are required by the init method. So let's try to do that. So here when we now open and close the parentheses, VS Code also is smart enough to understand that since there is an init method now present in this remote control class, we would have to pass in a color and a functionality to create an instance of this particular class. And you can see that the first argument is actually self, but here it is not being mentioned, because any function that you have attached to a class, right, the main reason we call the functions that are attached to a class as methods is because the method's first argument will always be self, which is basically that instance object, right, that object that is instanced out of that class. So so basically that's given, right? So that's the reason over here the first argument is not mentioned, that self is not mentioned. We don't have to explicitly mention that, but that's what is happening. Okay, so but anyway, over here this in order to create an instance of remote control, we have to pass in the eye color and the eye functionality. All right, so the eye color, let's set the color to be white, as we saw that the remote color is white. So white, and then the functionality is it turns on AC. Okay, so now what we used to do with two more lines is basically we are setting it up in a single line, but more than the reduction of the lines, what is more important here is we now clearly know that these are the two properties that definitely need to be set when you're creating an instance of the class remote control. So now we have set it up in such a way that whenever you create an instance, whenever you want to create an instance of remote control class, you would have to pass in these two values. All right, that's fine. But then what is going to happen here? What is going to happen here? Will the old method still work? Will we be still able to create an instance of a class without passing those arguments? So let's check it out. Okay, let's see what Python interpreter says for this particular line. Okay, line number 19. So let me just open the terminal, and over here let's just say Python and the name of that Python file. And you can see that just as we anticipated on line number 19, which is over here, it says type error, right? So the init method is expecting two positional arguments, eye color and eye functionality, right? So that's the cool part now. This statement is no longer correct, because using this init method specified saying that whenever you want to create an instance of this class remote control, you have to, okay, this is not an option, okay, it's like definitely you would have to pass in two values, one for eye color and one for eye functionality. Only if you pass in those values, you would be able to create an instance of the class remote control. So that's the reason it's erroring out, giving us a type error over here. All right, so now to let's make changes to this TV remote as well. So basically the first value is black and the second value is this one turns on TV, right? So, and we can remove those additional lines. So now let's run this code and see what happens. Okay, so let's just execute this now and see what just happened. It's just saying this is a empty string, which empty string remote, which empty string. What happened? Why are the values not coming through? Let's go through the code and see. So here you can see that we have made a big mistake over here. I have made a big mistake over here. What the mistake is, we are taking this eye color value that is coming in and we are assigning it to a variable called color, but this color is actually inside the scope of this method alone, right? So that is the reason inside this method, right, like there is this variable called color, and we have created a variable called functionality, and inside this method those values exist. So actually we can even prove that. We can just write a print statement, and let's just say inside init we'll just print, we'll just print the color format, and let's just also print the functionality. So now if we execute the code now, right, we can see that inside the init method, the variable called color and variable called functionality exist, and it will even be printed over here. Okay, let's just quickly check it out. So here if you see, you can see that over here, when this instance of when we created an instance of remote control for the AC remote, right, over here, see the color value that we passed in white is getting printed, and also the functionality value that we passed in turns on the AC is also getting printed. Similarly for the black, basically similarly for the TV remote also, the color and functionality, they are getting printed. But when it comes to this button pressed method, when you are calling this button pressed method, right, at this instance, we can see that, clearly see that the self.color and self.functionality is just giving us empty strings. So that's the reason, you're here, that's the reason, this button pressed is printing. This is a empty string, right? Empty string remote, which, and then the entire functionality variable is also being an empty string. The reason this is happening is because this color and functionality that we are to which we are assigning the eye color and eye functionality to should be a object variable of this class rather than being a local variable. So right now it's just a local variable, that is, it exists only within the confines of this method called init. Okay, method called dunder init. So in order for this variable color to exist beyond this method, right, we would have to attach it to the object. As a matter of fact, inside this button press method, right, like the variable that we are using to, like format the string is basically, like attached to the self object, right? So it's attached to the self dot color. It's not just the local variable color. It's a self. It's self dot color, and here the functionality is also self dot functionality. So in order to correct this situation, right, all we need to do is just go here and, like say self dot color. Okay, and where are we getting the self from? It's this. It's, it's this inherently present inside all the basic, default methods inside of a class. So here in this method, since the self, like is coming through, self is basically this instance, the AC remote instance that is coming through. So we are attaching this, like color variable to the self. Okay, and also we'll do the same with the functionality variable as well, self dot functionality. Now, like we can remove, and we can remove these print statements now, like we don't need them anymore. Now if you see, like it actually even makes sense if you just look at the class itself. So, when you create an instance of remote control, you're passing the value white, and the functionality turns on AC, white, and turns on AC. So white, the one that is coming in, is getting assigned to self dot color, and it will definitely be used, like when you're calling the button press method. And also, like the self dot functionality also is going to be is what is being used inside the button press method. So that will also be used when we are formatting the string when you call the button press. All right, cool. So let's just test this out. Okay, so now if we just run our Python code, yes, as expected, now it's working, right? It's saying this is a white remote, because white is what we passed in, which turns on the AC. And, like for the TV, it's TV remote. It says it is a black remote which turns on the TV, right? So this is really powerful. Okay, so this enables us as programmers to control how our class is being instantiated. All right, so because many times you would be working as part of a team, right? We'll be working as part of a team, and maybe, like one developer might be in charge of, creating the classes, designing the classes, right? And, like there could be a bunch of other developers who are making use of these classes to create instances, to create objects, and, make these objects interact with each other. So it's very important for us as, like developers who create these classes to be able up in such a way that so that it could be used only for the purpose for which we as the creators intended for it to be used. Okay, so, and not just, like be used all over the place. So that is why, like special methods such as this dunder init method, like is really useful, because it essentially enables us to control the way in which an object is created, for our class. So I hope this video was useful and it gave a bit of insight on, like how we can make use of this dunder init method. And I'll see you again in the next video. Cheers.